Hello friends, welcome to the 9th part of our exciting story. Today, we continue the journey, in which every step of the heroes becomes more and more dangerous and unpredictable. You will find incredible turns of events when our characters will face new challenges, and their decisions will become key to the further development of the plot. In this series, secrets will be revealed that will make you reconsider everything you knew up to this point. So, get comfortable, click the subscribe button. Yes, click this useless button so that some person who voices all this will become a little bit pleased. The most important thing is hope. Chapter 9. The next morning, he got up early, and after breakfast, he said a warm goodbye to Bob, Sarah, and little Ryan. After saying goodbye and promising to keep them informed of his wedding plans, Ryan left and headed for the airport. On the way, he noticed a large church, and something told him to stop. He hadn't been to church since Sarah's baptism, but something drew him to the place. He parked and went inside. He lit a candle for his old departed comrades and sat in the back pew, noticing that he was the only one in the large sanctuary, unless you counted the priest at the altar. He felt like kneeling, and thought of Dawson and all the others who had never returned. Kneeling, his head resting on his clasped hands, he mentally confessed to himself everything he'd done since the day Lisa and Sarah had left. All of his hatred, his anger, his frustration all poured out of his heart. He mourned his losses and gave thanks for what he had now. When he finished, he looked at the large crucifix above the altar and wondered what it meant. As he leaned back in the pew, a young Hispanic man in priestly attire sat down next to him. "Is everything all right, my son?" he asked softly. Ryan smiled to himself. He was old enough to be this man's father. He held his tongue, which was unusual for him, and looked at the young priest. The man smiled, nodding his head. "Now yes, Padre," he said. "Thank you." "Then may the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, my son, be with you," said the priest, crossing himself. "Thanks again," Ryan said. The priest stood up, and Ryan joined him. "If you need anything, prayer, confession, counseling, please don't hesitate to ask," the priest said. "I think I'm okay now, Padre," Ryan said. "Thanks anyway." "I will still pray for you, my son," the priest said, with a nod of his head. "I feel you are beginning a new chapter in your life, and you will need all the help you can get." "Don't you need to know my name?" asked Ryan. The priest smiled, shaking his head. "God already knows, my son," he said. Ryan nodded his head. "I think so," he said. "Thank you." The priest smiled, nodded, and walked down the large aisle in front. Ryan took his hat and walked out of the building. Stepping out into the bright sunlight, he took a deep breath. He felt like a new man. He laughed to himself, got in his car and drove to the airport. He called Beverly when the plane landed, threw the duffel bag into the car, and headed home. As he drove, he felt better than ever. Everything around him seemed fresh, new, like he'd never looked at it before. Finally, he reached the house and saw Beverly waiting for him on the porch. His eyes almost popped out of his forehead when he saw her. She was always beautiful, he thought. "You're a looker," he told her, putting his arm around her shoulders. They kissed for several minutes. "If you're hungry, lunch will be by the pool," she said with a sly smile. "Lead the way," he said. When they went out to the backyard, he looked at the pool, expecting to see a picnic basket or something. He looked around, but still didn't see any lunch items. "Where's lunch?" he asked. "Right there," she said behind his back. He turned and saw her standing on the deck. "I cut out a small scene here because of video hosting rules, but all full versions of the stories are hosted in our exclusive community on Patreon. The link is in the description." "I almost forgot," he said. "I have something for you." He pulled a box from his pocket and opened it. Her eyes widened as she looked at the set of rings. "They're beautiful," she said. He pulled out his wedding ring and put it gently on her finger. She smiled, and a tear appeared in her eye. "I love it," she said. "And I love you." "I love you too," he said. She studied his face for a moment before she spoke again. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You look, I don't know, a little different." I do, actually, he said. I feel like a new person turning over a new leaf. She smiled and kissed him again. I'm so glad, she said. I think we've both had enough sadness for a lifetime, don't you? Yes, he said. I'm in complete agreement. Oh, I have something else. What? She asked. He went inside and pulled a box out of his duffel bag. He held it out to her and watched as she opened it. She pulled out a wrought iron chicken made to hang on the wall. I like it, she said. Why did you decide to purchase it? I don't know, he said. I saw it and thought of you. I thought it was time to hang things on the walls to make this place feel like home again. I think it's a good idea, she said, and I know exactly where to put it. He smiled when she said that. Yes, he thought. Home, sweet home. For real this time. After they dressed and hung the chicken on the wall in the kitchen, he called Russell. Hey, Ryan, Russell said. Did you get everything sorted out? Yes, that's right, and I'd like to talk to you about a job offer, Ryan said. Great, Russell said. Come on over and we'll talk. Be right there, Ryan said. After letting Beverly know, he cleaned himself up and drove into town, stopping in front of the sheriff's office. Once inside, he noticed the sheriff's deputies scrutinizing him. Sheriff Coltrane is expecting you, Mr. Caldwell, the uniformed deputy said. This way. He followed her into Russell's office. She opened the door and ushered him inside, then stepped out and closed the door. Russell stood up and shook his hand. Have a seat, he said. Ryan sat down and turned to face Russell. So, do you have any questions? Yeah, Ryan said. I have one. What about my bio? I guess you already know what I've been doing for 9 years? Russell smiled. You mean you're a private security consultant and all that? Asked Russell, making air quotes at the word private security consultant. Yeah, that, Ryan said. Well, 9 years of training security officers to deal with dangerous situations is a lot of experience, if you want my opinion, Russell said. Plus, your service in the military was absolutely exceptional. The county council agrees with that. What? Asked Ryan. Yes, Russell said. They seem to think you can teach our deputies a thing or two. I never thought about it, Ryan said. Don't worry, son, Russell said. I've already done your background check. Standard procedure. They just want to make sure you're not an axe murderer hiding from the law. You've never been behind bars, and it checks out. Hell, you're cleaner on paper than some of my deputies. Now, if you're in, you'll have to interview with the commission. It's pretty much a formality. I'd suggest you maybe buy some nicer clothes and a new hat. What about the beard? Asked Ryan. Trust me, it hides a multitude of sins. Russell smiled. If you keep it neat and trimmed, it's not a problem, he said. Besides, it gives you character. Ryan smiled. You've thought this through, haven't you? He asked. Russell smiled. It's within the rules, my boy, he said. As soon as they give the okay, we'll get you a uniform, and you'll spend some time watching me. So, what do you say? What the hell, Ryan said. The worst thing they can do is say no. Let's set it up. That's my boy, Russell said. How about tomorrow morning? Say 8:30? Yeah, sounds good, Ryan said. I'll go downstairs and get some new clothes. That's it, Russell said. See ya. After that, Ryan spent most of the day shopping for new clothes, shoes, and a new hat. Beverly was shocked when he walked into the house loaded with new clothes. Never complain about me buying new clothes, she joked. So, when are you going to the council? Tomorrow morning, he said. I'm glad you took this case, she said. It will be good for you to get involved in the community. I'm so proud of you. He smiled and kissed her. That evening, they watched the news and learned that the federal case against Knight had expanded to include several middle managers. There seemed to be more people involved than originally thought, but none of them obviously knew the whole situation. Jake's disclosure also caused the company's stock price to plummet even further, as confidence in the company plummeted to near zero. The next day, Ryan appeared before the county board along with Russell. As Russell pointed out, the meeting was cordial and mostly informal. There were only a few questions that Ryan had to think hard before answering. Doesn't this blindfold create a problem with depth perception? One of the board members asked. It was like that at first, Ryan said, but I learned to deal with it. So you can drive a car and shoot a gun with no problem? None so far, Ryan said. Personally, I'd rather see someone with direct law enforcement experience, another council member said. You don't even have a law enforcement degree. If we do, would you be willing to enroll in online courses and get a 2-year degree? Absolutely, Ryan said. How much do you expect to get, Mr. Caldwell? One of the female board members asked. I hadn't thought of that, ma'am, Ryan said. To tell you the truth, I don't need the money. Yes, we checked your financials with the bank, she said. By the way, that was a wonderful thing you did for Miss Simons. Thank you, he said. She needed help, so I decided to help. So, as far as compensation goes, how much do you think you'd like to receive? She asked. Honestly, I hadn't given it much thought, he said. Whatever you're paying Sheriff Coltrane, I guess. Maybe you could donate it to a homeless shelter downtown or a women's and children's center? She smiled and nodded her head. I think we can arrange that, she said. Do you? She added, looking at the other board members. They looked at each other and nodded their heads. Yes, we can do that, one of them said. Gentlemen, I think we've found our candidate, don't you? Said the female board member. They conferred among themselves before answering. I agree, one of the council members said. I move that we vote in favor of it. Seconded, another council member added. Well then, let's take a vote, the councilwoman said. All those in favor of appointing Mr. Ryan Caldwell as sheriff, raise your hands. Everyone raised their hands. All those opposed? No one raised their hands. Very good, she said. Mr. Caldwell, welcome aboard and congratulations. Thank you, Ryan said, accepting her hand. Sheriff, why don't you take Mr. Caldwell downstairs and give him a uniform? She asked. We'll have the swearing-in ceremony around 1 o'clock this afternoon. Will do, he said, standing up. They returned to the sheriff's office, and Russell led Ryan into the back room, where he found several shirts and pairs of pants that looked like they might fit. Ryan was relieved to see that they had all been washed and ironed and were still hanging in their protective plastic pouches. Ryan tried them on and found that they fit perfectly. Russell also picked up a new hat, a gray Stetson, and handed it to him. It looks like it fits well, he said. Ryan tried it on and was surprised to see that it fit better than his old beat-up hat. Russell looked at him and nodded his head approvingly. Looking good, son, he said. He pulled a black name tag from his desk drawer and pinned it to Ryan's shirt. Obviously, Ryan thought, he had it made especially for this occasion. After attaching the tag, Russell glanced at his watch. Just in time to take the oath of office, he said. Let me make a quick call. While Ryan watched, Russell pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. He was surprised to hear Beverly's voice in response. Russell winked at Ryan and put it on speaker. Beverly, I really need you to come to my office immediately, Russell said in a serious tone. Is everything okay? She asked. I don't know, he said, but this is serious, and I need you to get here as soon as possible. Okay, Sheriff, she said in a frightened voice. I'll be there in a few minutes. Russell ended the call and put the phone away. He looked at Ryan again and smiled. It was mean, Ryan said. Yeah, she was, Russell said. But I had to make sure she was coming, you know? It wouldn't have been right for you to take the oath without her presence, would it? A few minutes later, Beverly walked through the front door and was escorted into Russell's office. Is everything okay? What's going on? She asked, exasperated. Russell smiled and sat her down. Everything is just fine, dear, he said. I just thought you might want to be here when they swear in your man. He turned to the door leading to the hallway and called out to Ryan. Beverly flinched when she saw her future husband enter in uniform. Wow, she said. I've always liked men in uniform, she told him. So when is the swearing in? She asked Russell. He glanced at his watch. Anytime, he said. A few minutes later, they heard the front door open and a group of well-dressed men entered the station. A sergeant entered Russell's office to let him know they had visitors. Thank you, Russell said. Have everyone gather in the main conference room, please. Will do, Sheriff, she said, and walked out of the office. Russell looked at Ryan and Beverly. Are you two ready for this? He asked. Ryan looked nervous. Ready as I'll ever be, I reckon, Ryan said. They walked down the hallway and into a large room that was full of people, including several uniformed sheriff's deputies. Ryan noticed an ice chest on the floor next to a table and a store-bought cake decorated for the ceremony. The deputies looked Ryan over as he entered, and he got the impression that they approved of Russell's choice. He didn't sense any hostility or jealousy in any of them, and that was good. The ceremony itself was short and sweet. The senior member of the county council took the oath of office, and Russell pinned a new badge on Ryan's chest. He handed something to Beverly and asked her to follow suit. She watched Russell pin 3 stars to the collar of Ryan's shirt, the insignia worn by the sheriff. She pinned the 2nd star on the remaining collar and stepped aside to admire it. "Congratulations, Sheriff," said the commissioner, shaking his hand. "And may God have mercy on your soul," he added, eliciting laughter from all present. "Thank you, Commissioner," Ryan said. "There's tea and Coca-Cola in the ice chest, and Ryan, sorry, Sheriff Caldwell, has the honor of serving the cake," Russell said to laughter. "Sorry, no beer, we're still on duty, you know." Ryan sliced a large cake and served first to Beverly, then to the sheriff's deputies. He gave a slice to Russell, then served the commissioners. After cutting off a small piece for himself, he noticed that there was still about 1/3 of the cake left. "Why don't we leave that for the guys on patrol?" he asked. Russell agreed. "Good idea," he said. The female sergeant smiled and put the cake in the refrigerator for safekeeping. Ryan ate his cake and then made his rounds, getting to know the sheriff's deputies he would soon have to answer for. They all seemed nice and seemed to accept him as their new sheriff. After the ceremony, Beverly walked over to Ryan and took him in her arms. He looked so good in his uniform, she thought. It was like it was tailored just for him. "You look so good, honey," she said. "I'm so proud of you." He smiled and kissed her. "Thank you, little lady," he said, doing a terrible John Wayne impersonation that made her laugh. "I'd better get back, dear," she said. "I need to stop by to pick up some chicken feed and make dinner. I'll see you at home, okay?" "I'll be there," he said, giving her another kiss. He watched her walk out the door. The sheriff's deputies congratulated her and seemed to welcome her into their little family. Ryan turned to Russell. "Now what?" he asked. "I will now issue you your weapons and equipment," Russell said. They walked to the weapons room, and Russell had him sign for his belt and Smith & Wesson M&P 9mm pistol, a full-size polymer-cased, striker-fired pistol similar to a Glock 17. Ryan knew it was one of the best 9mm pistols on the market and was surprised that such a small sheriff's department was issuing such pistols. He almost expected them to carry 6-shot revolvers. "One last thing," Russell said, pulling a small box out of his desk drawer. He handed the box to Ryan, who opened it and saw a small bar with a blue field with white stars on one side and 3 stripes, one white and red, above and below it. The white stripe said, U.S. Army Veteran. "What's that?" asked Ryan. "It's a small thing to show appreciation for your service," Russell said. "All the veterans get one of these." Ryan has seen some sheriff's deputies wear something similar, and noticed that Russell also has one that says, U.S. LMPD Veteran. "Thank you," Ryan said. "You're welcome," Russell said. "What now?" asked Ryan. "Well, we'll start bringing you up to speed tomorrow morning," Russell said. "Be here at 8 a.m. sharp." "See you later," Ryan said, as he gathered his civilian clothes. The deputies said their goodbyes as he walked out the door. Back at home, he kissed Beverly and headed upstairs. He looked at himself in the mirror. "There's a new sheriff in town," he said quietly to his reflection in the mirror. "The boys will never believe that," he thought to himself. He smiled as he imagined asking himself, "Feeling lucky, punk?" They had a quiet dinner and spent the evening in lovemaking. "I'm glad I was able to be a part of this ceremony today," Beverly said, snuggling up to him. "Me too," Ryan said. "Promise you'll be careful out there?" she asked. He put his arm around her shoulders and kissed her. "I'll be careful, little lady," he said. "I promise." The next 2 weeks flew by as Russell brought him up to speed on law enforcement. Ryan watched as Russell brought the deputies up to speed and took in all the nuances. This is a good group, he thought to himself. Dedicated, motivated, and dedicated. They knew what they were doing. Russell finished his briefing, turning to Ryan and asked, "Anything you want to add, Sheriff?" Ryan knew that this was Russell's way of making sure they knew that he would eventually take charge. "Be careful out there," Ryan said, causing the deputies to nod approvingly. Russell took Ryan to a live fire range and was surprised when Ryan went through it with ease, hitting all the bad guys and avoiding the good ones. They were really just cardboard dummies, but it was a useful exercise that helped the officers learn how to distinguish one from the other in a real situation. After that, the defensive driving course began, and Ryan handled it with ease. When he was done, Russell sat in the passenger seat and shook his head. "Where did you learn to drive like that?" he asked. "Oh, you'd be surprised," Ryan said. "No, I wouldn't," Russell said. In the time he had spent with Russell, Ryan had absorbed everything he could from the man like a sponge. Russell showed him how to use the radio and computer in his patrol car and walked him through simple traffic stops. Ryan enrolled in the University of Texas online program and spent all of his free time taking the courses assigned to him. Meanwhile, Russell drove him around town to introduce him to the locals, and all of them, having recovered from the shock of his eye patch and scar, accepted Ryan. One day, as they were walking, Ryan turned to Russell. "You seem to know I see you again, Sheriff," he said. Russell nodded his head. "Same thing, Agent Smith," Russell said. When Smith left, Russell turned to Ryan. "So, catching the bad guy is only half the battle. Come on, we've got paperwork to do. Correction, you have paperwork to do." Accepting the inevitable, Ryan headed to the office with Russell. That night, he held a trembling Beverly in his arms. She would have plenty of time for lovemaking later. "Hold me, please," she begged. He pulled her against him and breathed in her scent. "This is the second time you've saved my life," she said. "Tell me, is every day going to be like this?" "No, honey," he said. "I think we're done with that company. They threw all their strength at us, but they failed." But in the back of his mind, he knew they had been lucky. If Weston had pulled the trigger, things might have ended very differently. He kept it to himself, not wanting to cause Beverly any unnecessary suffering. 2 weeks after the shooting, Ryan sat at a large desk in his office. Russell had already moved to a smaller desk, giving him access to what would become his permanent work area. Finished with his daily reports, he was working on an online course, trying to get far enough ahead to take a week off for his honeymoon. Russell was out, patrolling and meeting with a real estate agent in hopes of selling his house. There was a knock on the door. He looked up and saw Sergeant Bledsoe. "Sheriff, there's a Texas Ranger here to see you," she said. "Let him in, please," Ryan said. She stepped aside to let the Ranger into his office. Ryan saw a tall, lanky, square-jawed man who looked like he had just stepped out of an old Western. He wore a tattered Stetson hat, a red shirt, blue jeans, cowboy boots with spurs, and a floor-length duster. Ryan discerned his badge and the pistols on his hips. Was it his imagination, or were they cartridge revolvers? He thought to himself. He gestured for the Ranger to enter the office and accepted his hand. "Have a seat." "What can I do for you today, Ranger?" asked Ryan. "The name is Meir," the Ranger said, sitting down. "Judge O'Meir, I wanted to let you know that the investigation is over. They have come to a conclusion in your favor." "Good to hear, Ranger Meir," Ryan said, wondering what kind of name that was. The Ranger gave him a hard look before continuing. "That was a great shot," Justice said. "Did you actually aim for his left eyeball?" Ryan nodded his head. "Yeah," Ryan said. "How do you know that?" "That's what you told Sheriff Coltrane, isn't it?" asked Justice. "I don't recall that being on the report," Ryan said. "It wasn't," Justice said. "It was just an observation on my part. That's what I do." "Say, was it because of?" he said, pointing to the Band-Aid covering Ryan's left eye. It caught his eye, and he saw a pile of clothes on the floor at her feet. He could also smell the odor of sweat coming from the cabin. They were both shocked at Ryan's appearance. "Driver's license and registration, please," Ryan said. The young man pulled out his license and took the registration card from the glove compartment. "I'd like to see your ID as well, young lady," Ryan added. While he watched, she pulled her license out of her purse that was on the floor. Ryan studied the IDs and looked at their faces. He verified that they were both 18 years old, probably high school seniors who had just decided to socialize a bit. He handed the IDs back and turned to the young man. "Get out of the car, sir," he said. "And you get dressed," he said to the girl. The young man got out of the truck, buttoning his pants and tightening his belt as he went. Ryan told him to stand by the back of the truck and looked at him carefully. He could tell the young man was close to wetting himself. "Do you love this girl, son?" asked Ryan quietly. "Yes. Yes, sir, I do," he said. Ryan nodded his head. "Are you planning on marrying this girl?" asked Ryan. "I don't know," said the young man. "Maybe." "So you like her enough to be with her here in the middle of nowhere, but not enough to marry her, right? Do your parents know? Do her parents know?" asked Ryan. "No, sir, they don't know," the man replied, trembling. "Listen, son," Ryan said. "It's getting late, and I don't like the idea of dragging you two for public debauchery at all. So I'm only going to say this once. Next time you get the urge, show some respect. Take her to a motel or something. You know, somewhere with 4 walls and clean sheets. It's very dangerous out here late at night, you know. People crossing the border, wild animals, snakes, one-eyed sheriffs. You know what I'm talking about?" The man nodded his head. "Okay," Ryan said. "You get out of here. And don't let me catch you on this road again. You hear me?" "Yes, sir," the man said, climbing into the truck. Watching him, the man looked out the window. "Thank you, Sheriff," he said. Ryan nodded his head, and the man drove off, no doubt relieved that he wasn't going to jail. At least not today. Ryan got back in the car and looked at Russell, who was grinning widely. "Well?" he asked. "Yeah, they were doing the dirty deeds," Ryan said. "And you let them go?" asked Russell. "What the hell?" Ryan said. "There were no drugs or alcohol in there, just a couple guys. I kicked his ass, told him not to come around here again, took her to a motel or something. I don't think he's going to give us any more trouble." Russell laughed. "Welcome to law enforcement, Ryan," he said, as he turned on the program. Ryan knew he would have something to tell Beverly this night. During this time, Ryan and Beverly were also planning their wedding. They finally decided to have the ceremony in the backyard of his house. While Ryan was working, Beverly prepared almost everything for the ceremony. Ryan offered his help, but Beverly didn't want to hear about it. She approached the pastor of the country church she had attended when her first husband was alive, and he agreed to perform the ceremony, but only after he met Ryan. The meeting went well, and Ryan showed up at the church in his uniform. They talked about this and that for a while longer, and by the end of the meeting, the pastor felt calm about Beverly's connection to the tall man with the scar. Ryan had been following the news, but it seemed that other cases had managed to push Night Petroleum off the front page. Everything, including Jake's will and the class action lawsuit, was now in the hands of the court system and lawyers, who were more skilled at slowing things down than anything else. Ryan wondered if it would ever be resolved. He kept in touch with Sarah, Bob, Bill, and Jorge. They were all glad he was now sheriff and loved the pictures Beverly sent them of him in his uniform. "Guys will never believe this shit," Bob wrote in response to the photos, which caused Ryan to laugh. One day, while Ryan and Russell were working in the office, Agent Smith walked in the door. He smiled when he saw Ryan in his uniform. "Damn," he said. "You look good in that uniform. It looks good on you." "Thank you," Ryan said. "Yeah, I'll make a lawman out of him yet," Russell said, shaking Smith's hand. "So, what can we do for you, Agent Smith? Do you have a couple minutes?" Smith asked Ryan. "Yeah, sure," Ryan said. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" asked Smith. Ryan looked at Russell before answering. "Yeah," Ryan said. "Right here. Sheriff Coltrane knows everything. There are no secrets in this office." Smith looked at Russell, who nodded his head. "Okay," Smith said, sitting down. "I'm concerned about a few things about that place in New Mexico. First, there were only 2 cars there from Mexico and a Lear airplane. I knew from the number of bodies found that there was no way they could have gotten there on that plane and those 2 cars. I also doubted that anyone could have heard the gunfire from 12 miles away. So I pulled out the 911 call and had our experts analyze it. They detected the noise of a running car in the background. So someone called while they were on the road? Asked Ryan. Smith nodded his head. Yeah, they should have, he said. I did some digging and found a car registered to Knight Petroleum in New Mexico. The address matched the one used for the campground. We put out a nationwide search for it and found it in a long-term parking lot at Albuquerque International Airport. Sunport? Asked Ryan. Yes, it's an international airport, Smith said. It's been called that since the 1990s because they have about 280 days of sunshine a year. Smith pulled out a picture and showed it to Ryan. Security cameras captured this man getting out of his car. Ryan looked at it, and Smith saw recognition on the scarred man's face. Have you seen this man before? Asked Smith. Only about 100 times in my nightmares, Ryan said. He's the one who fired the RPG that did this, he added, pointing to his eye. Do you know who he is? His name is James Weston, Smith said. He's a former FBI employee. He left the bureau about 5 years ago and went to work for Knight Petroleum. He's one of Jacob Knight's main enforcers. Do you know where he is now? Asked Ryan. We've also put out a wanted notice for him, but we haven't found anything yet, Smith said. I'm sure he knows we're looking for him and knows how to avoid us. You think he had something to do with the deaths of your agents? Asked Ryan. I don't know, Smith said, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does. Do you think he'll come here? Asked Ryan. I can almost guarantee it, Smith said. You're the one who gave us all this information, so I'm pretty sure he's coming after you. He pulled out some additional photos of Weston from his time at the FBI. You might want to warn your deputies. Ryan nodded his head, and Russell agreed. Are you going to be here for a while? Asked Ryan. I thought about it for maybe a day or two, Smith said. Why don't you come and crash at my place then? Ryan said. Beverly would love the company, and we always have plenty of food. My pleasure, Smith said. Thank you. Then it's settled, Ryan said. Let me call her and let her know. I'll pick you up in the morning, Ryan, Russell said. The sheriff's getting his new car tomorrow. Sounds like a plan, Smith said. They left at the end of the workday, with Smith following Ryan to his house. Beverly greeted Ryan with a kiss and offered Smith her hand. Good to see you again, Agent Smith, she said. I hope you like meatloaf, mashed potatoes and gravy, and string beans. Sounds great, Smith said. After Ryan changed into his uniform, they sat down to eat. I have to say, Ryan, Smith said, that uniform really suits you. I'm impressed. Well, thank you, Ryan said. I still have a lot to learn. Smith chuckled. You never stop learning in this business, he said. Any news on Knight Petroleum? Asked Ryan. I haven't heard much in the news lately. That's because it's mostly in the hands of lawyers and bureaucrats, Smith says. The DEA is looking into drug connections. Lisa and her lawyers are working with the DA's office back east. It looks like she's starting to get too close to Jake and Elmer's operations. And that's why they tried to take her out? Asked Ryan. Looks like it, Smith said. I'm sure she must have known some of what was going on. After all, she's been there with Jake all these years. Yet, he was able to keep things from her, so she says. Do you think they'll make a case against her? Asked Ryan. Smith shook his head. I doubt it, Smith said. She's become state's evidence, and I personally don't think anyone would prosecute a woman in her state. What about shooting those 2 agents? Asked Ryan. After the storm caused by the events in New Mexico, the agency changed course, Smith said. But personally, I don't think they're going to get anywhere. After that, I'll tell you, some heads rolled. Smith looked at Ryan before continuing. I must say that I have examined this camp with as much care as any other crime scene, Smith said. I don't know how you managed to get in and out like that without leaving any direct evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. Just a bunch of brass and carnage. Even my partner said it looked like a rival drug cartel. The DEA said the same thing. I have experience with this sort of thing, Ryan said quietly. Uh-huh, Smith said quietly. You can't do that anymore, you know. At least not while you're wearing that badge. I know, Ryan said. I don't think that's going to be necessary. I hope not, Smith said. Me too, Ryan said. The next day, Russell picked up Ryan in his patrol car. Ryan kissed Beverly and advised her to be on the lookout. "If you see anything suspicious, call me right away," he said. "Don't worry, I will," she said. "Now get going. Catch those bad guys." Ryan got in the car and Russell set off, Smith following behind them. When they pulled into the lot, Russell got in the back seat and Smith parked next to him. Ryan saw the new four-wheel drive truck and looked at Russell. "Is it mine?" he asked. Russell nodded his head. "Of course," he said. "I know how partial you are to trucks, and I know you like the extra space over your head." "Thank you," Ryan said. They got out of the car, and a man in a shirt and tie walked up to them. He handed Ryan a bunch of keys. "Hope you like your new car, Sheriff," he said. "Top of the line, all the bells and whistles. It can outrun just about anything, on or off the road." "Thanks," Ryan said. "Looks good." "Nice work, Wilbur," Russell said. "Did you get the paperwork?" "Sure thing, Sheriff," the man said. "Okay, get him inside and Sergeant Bledsoe will see to it," Russell said. The man nodded his head and went inside. "Damn," Smith said, looking around the truck. "New job, new truck, new woman. You really hit the jackpot." Ryan smiled. "No argument there," he said. They entered the house and made their way to the meeting room where the rest of the sheriff's deputies were already gathered. Russell, Ryan, and Smith walked to the front of the room. Russell gave the briefing and then handed it over to Smith, introducing him. Smith pointed to a large picture of Weston on the wall. "The man in this picture is James Weston," Smith began. "He's wanted by the FBI for questioning regarding crimes related to the night petroleum camp in New Mexico that was attacked. He's a former FBI agent, and we believe he's on his way here." "Excuse me, Agent Smith," the deputy said, raising his hand. "Why would he come here?" Smith looked at Ryan. Everyone else did too. "He'll be looking for me," Ryan said. "Whatever you do, don't try to tackle him alone. If you see him, let me know immediately. Call for backup. This man should be considered armed and extremely dangerous." Everyone nodded their heads and studied the pictures handed out by Sergeant Bledsoe. "Any questions?" asked Ryan. There weren't any, so Ryan brushed them off with a warning. "Be careful on the street." Everyone left the briefing room and headed to their places. Some, like Sergeant Bledsoe, to their desks, others to their patrol cars. One went to the street where his car was parked. A few minutes later, Sergeant Bledsoe returned to Russell's office, where he, Ryan, and Smith were discussing the situation with Weston. "Sheriff," she said, "there's a man standing out front. He looks like that guy from Weston. He's got a hostage and a gun." The three men jumped up and ran into the office. Ryan looked out the window. Across the street stood Weston. He had one arm around the neck of a short blonde woman, Beverly. In his other hand, he held a small revolver. "Caldwell!" shouted Weston. "I know you're there. Come out here and face me like a man." Ryan looked at Russell. "That's my problem, Sheriff," he said. "Let me deal with it. Besides, it's about time I started making myself useful." Russell thought for a moment, then nodded his head. "Okay, Ryan," he said quietly. "How do you want to play this out?" Ryan looked at the remaining assistants in the office. "Clear the streets," he told them. "Get the civilians out of there. And close off both ends of this street. Let's go." They moved quickly out the doors and began to move the civilians out of harm's way. Sergeant Bledsoe spoke into her radio, and 4 sheriff's patrol cars blocked off each end of the street. Ryan looked at the 2 men who were with him. "Okay, Russell, you have to go 10 yards to my right," he said. "Smith, go 10 yards to the left. Follow me." "Yes, sir," Russell said. For a moment he looked at Ryan. The tall man with the scar was not just a superior, he was in command, and Russell knew that was a big difference. They walked out the door, and Russell walked 10 yards down the sidewalk as commanded, drawing his gun. Smith went in the opposite direction, pulling out his weapon. Ryan stood and faced Weston. He looked at Beverly, who was struggling as Weston held her tightly. He realized she was scared and looked at her face. She calmed down, and he nodded slightly. He drew his gun and put a round in the chamber. Standing in the open, he took aim at Weston. "Boy, if you don't put the gun down right now and let this woman go," "You're going to be in a lot of trouble," he said. "You hear me, boy? I'm giving you a countdown to 3. The sheriff's deputies nearby looked at Ryan, shocked. Some of them had never seen anyone do anything like that. Ryan didn't even try to take cover. Worse, he mocked the man, using expressions that would piss anyone off in these parts. As Ryan stood with his gun pointed at him, Weston looked around nervously at Smith, Ryan, and Russell. "This is between you and me, Caldwell," Weston said. "I missed you last time, but I won't this time. But maybe I'll hang around with that pretty girl of yours first." "One," Ryan called out. Weston shook his head. Ryan looked at Beverly and nodded slightly, hoping she would understand what he was talking about. He had trained her in self-defense and had recently taught her how to throw a man who had grabbed her from behind. "2," Ryan called out. He looked at Weston's feet again. "What's the matter, Weston? Are you hiding behind a woman?" He scoffed. Weston's face began to redden. Then Ryan saw Beverly's arms reach up to wrap around her neck. "Good girl," he thought to himself. "3," Ryan called out. Beverly ducked as far as she could, throwing Weston off balance. Unable to complete the throw, she turned and hit him in the groin with her knee, before running away under the arms of the deputy. Enraged, off balance, and in pain, Weston got to his feet and took aim at Ryan. Ryan, wasting no time, put a round bullet into Weston. The 3 men approached Weston's body, their guns still aimed at him. As they approached him, Ryan tossed Weston's gun aside, noticing that it was an old single-action revolver. The trigger hadn't been pulled yet. He looked at Russell before he spoke. "Is this where I'm supposed to read him his rights?" he asked, eliciting a laugh from Russell. "I don't think that will be a problem," Russell said. Before he spoke again, he looked at Weston's face. "Were you aiming for his left eyeball?" he asked Ryan. "Of course," Ryan said. "An eye for an eye. Isn't that what the good book says?" "Yeah, but I don't think it was about your skill with firearms," Russell said. Ryan turned and saw Sergeant Bledsoe crossing the street. "I called an ambulance, Sheriff," she said. Ryan nodded his head. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said, gesturing for her to follow him. He walked over to Beverly, who threw herself into his arms and sobbed. He hugged her as she cried. "Are you okay?" he asked her. She nodded her head. "I was so scared," she said. "It's all right," he said. "You did a good job. We're partners, remember?" She nodded her head. "Why don't you go inside with Sergeant Bledsoe? She'll keep an eye on you and take your statement, okay? I'll be right behind you." "Okay," she said, shivering. Sergeant Bledsoe put his arm around her shoulders and led her back across the street. "It's okay, sweetheart," he heard Bledsoe say. "He can't hurt you anymore." Ryan turned back to Weston's body. "I thought you said this guy was a former FBI agent?" asked Ryan to Smith. "Yeah, he did," Smith said. "I guess he must have gotten stupid in his old age or something." "Looks like it," Ryan said. By then the ambulance had arrived. The paramedic examined Weston and shook his head. They put his body on a gurney, covered him, and loaded him into the back of the car. "Well, Sheriff," Russell said, "looks like you'll be calling in the cleanup, and you'll take care of the paperwork. You do know there's going to be an investigation into the shooting, right?" Ryan nodded his head. "That's what I thought," Ryan said. "Welcome to law enforcement," Russell said, patting Ryan on the back. "One thing's for sure." "What's that?" asked Ryan. "Now everyone in town will feel a lot safer. Anyone who comes here looking for trouble will know that the sheriff in this town is best not to be messed with," Russell said. They went back to the office and Ryan made some calls while Sergeant Bledsoe recorded Beverly's statement. When they were done, the sergeant brought Beverly up to him. "Sheriff, I'm going to take Beverly to her car now if that's okay with you," she asked. She was delivering eggs to Mrs. Williams when the suspect grabbed her. He knew Mrs. Williams lived nearby, on a small street a few blocks from downtown, a short walk away. Before answering, he looked at Beverly. "Are you okay?" he asked her. "I am now," she said. He put his arms around her and pulled her tight against him. "All right, honey," he said. "Why don't you head home? I'll see you tonight." "I need to deliver more eggs first," she said. He smiled and nodded his head. "Okay, baby," he said. "Just be careful. If you can't handle it, call me and I'll come help." "I'll be fine," she said. He watched the sergeant lead Beverly out the door. "I suppose that concludes my part of the business," said Smith. "I'm going back if you don't need anything else." "I think we're ready," Ryan said. "Thanks again for everything. You'll be here for the wedding, right?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me at bay," Smith said. He also shook hands with Russell. "Good to see you again, Sheriff," he said. Russell nodded his head. "Same thing, Agent Smith," Russell said. When Smith left, Russell turned to Ryan. "So, catching the bad guy is only half the battle. Come on, we've got paperwork to do. Correction, you have paperwork to do." Accepting the inevitable, Ryan headed to the office with Russell. That night, he held a trembling Beverly in his arms. She would have plenty of time for lovemaking later. "Hold me, please," she begged. He pulled her against him and breathed in her scent. "This is the second time you've saved my life," she said. "Tell me, is every day going to be like this?" "No, honey," he said. "I think we're done with that company. They threw all their strength at us, but they failed." But in the back of his mind, he knew they had been lucky. If Weston had pulled the trigger, things might have ended very differently. He kept it to himself, not wanting to cause Beverly any unnecessary suffering. 2 weeks after the shooting, Ryan sat at a large desk in his office. Russell had already moved to a smaller desk, giving him access to what would become his permanent work area. Finished with his daily reports, he was working on an online course, trying to get far enough ahead to take a week off for his honeymoon. Russell was out, patrolling and meeting with a real estate agent in hopes of selling his house. There was a knock on the door. He looked up and saw Sergeant Bledsoe. "Sheriff, there's a Texas Ranger here to see you," she said. "Let him in, please," Ryan said. She stepped aside to let the Ranger into his office. Ryan saw a tall, lanky, square-jawed man who looked like he had just stepped out of an old Western. He wore a tattered Stetson hat, a red shirt, blue jeans, cowboy boots with spurs, and a floor-length duster. Ryan discerned his badge and the pistols on his hips. Was it his imagination, or were they cartridge revolvers? He thought to himself. He gestured for the Ranger to enter the office and accepted his hand. "Have a seat." "What can I do for you today, Ranger?" asked Ryan. "The name is Meir," the Ranger said, sitting down. "Judge O'Meir, I wanted to let you know that the investigation is over. They have come to a conclusion in your favor." "Good to hear, Ranger Meir," Ryan said, wondering what kind of name that was. The Ranger gave him a hard look before continuing. "That was a great shot," Justice said. "Did you actually aim for his left eyeball?" Ryan nodded his head. "Yeah," Ryan said. "How do you know that?" "That's what you told Sheriff Coltrane, isn't it?" asked Justice. "I don't recall that being on the report," Ryan said. "It wasn't," Justice said. "It was just an observation on my part. That's what I do." "Say, was it because of?" he said, pointing to the Band-Aid covering Ryan's left eye. It's time to wrap up the 9th part of our story and prepare you for the next and final 10th episode, and to gently remind you of the importance of one click for you and one subscription for me. Throughout Ryan's story, we have witnessed his metamorphosis, from a man immersed in grief and internal conflicts to one who finds meaning and peace in life. His final act, going to church, hides more than just a symbolic purification. It is a moment of deep introspection, where he realizes all his mistakes and the pain accumulated over the years of struggle. It is here that his inner liberation takes place, liberation from the shadow of the past, which allows him to make new decisions built on peace and confidence. The scene in the church demonstrates the importance of self-redemption and acceptance of one's mistakes as the key to true inner peace. When the young priest tells Ryan that he is starting a new chapter in his life, we understand that these are not just words. They are a harbinger of the changes that have already begun to happen inside our hero. This is the moment when Ryan lets go of his past and realizes that he is ready to move on, taking on a new role as sheriff, the protector of his community. However, despite this new path, there are remnants of his old self within Ryan. When he stands before the committee, discussing his future role as sheriff, he still feels an inner uncertainty that surfaces from time to time. This suggests that even after such significant changes and victories over himself, the process of full recovery and confidence takes time and the support of loved ones. Ryan's relationship with Beverly also plays a key role in his transformation. She becomes not only a life partner for him, but also an anchor that helps him stay afloat during difficult times. Their mutual understanding and support testify to the fact that true love and partnership can help overcome any difficulties. And so, when Ryan accepts his new position as sheriff, another challenge opens up for him. This move symbolizes not only a new beginning for him as a professional, but also as a person who is ready to take responsibility for the safety and well-being of others. Ryan's new role in society will test his newfound inner strength and wisdom. It is at this turning point that we end the 9th part of the story. The 10th part promises to be even more exciting. How will Ryan cope with his new role? What difficulties await him ahead? And will he be able to maintain this inner peace that he has finally found? Don't forget that the full version of all episodes is available on our Patreon, where you can support the project and get access to additional materials. See you in the next part, friends. It will be very interesting.